Welcome to Season 3 of the Chai Break Podcast. We're excited to engage in more inspiring conversations around our cross-cultural experiences.
This season, we're diving deep into an often grey area and a taboo in our culture, mental health and well-being. So, join us on our mission to break the barriers and get comfortable in those often uncomfortable spaces. Hello, welcome back to the Chai Break Podcast. This is part 2 of our Chaivisation around normalizing therapy. So if you haven't already, this is your gentle nudge to listen to episode 1, where we laid out the foundation for how this season of the podcast is going to shape up our personal mental health journey and so much more.
In today's episode, we wanted to talk about South Asian mental health statistics, barriers in access to mental health, and organizations that are doing the groundwork around creating a database of mental health professionals that is made available to the community. Across the course of their lifetimes, Shweta, and we've been reading about this, right? That at least 1 in 5 South Asians report a mood or anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. And the actual rate is actually kind of alarming. They might be even much more higher, thanks now to a lot of self-reporting and lack of identification of key symptoms of these mental health conditions.
That is actually very true because, I think South Asians as a population, because of the stigma, because of the taboo that has surrounded it for so long, and only now in the last, say, 5 years, 10 years, people are actually, talking about mental health in the open.
Yeah.
If you go back to research and from what I've been reading is that the data is really lacking. I feel like what data shows and versus the reality is almost double because of this.
Yeah.
Not only are they not reaching out to therapists for just a regular therapy session, but also in terms of being diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I think, we were talking to an expert recently, and that was one of the outcomes of that. He kind of had the understanding that not only people hesitate to go to a therapist, but once they get a diagnosis saying that, oh, you have depression or you have anxiety, those terms scare people. So they don't want to go, don't want to get that diagnosis. And there's just a lot of hesitation around that.
Yeah, I think the taboo still exists, right? Especially in the South Asian community, because once the news work goes out that you're seeing a therapist, still there are people who shy away from the concept of actually seeking someone for mental health, which means that they are not mentally stable, which means that they are quote unquote mad or quote unquote mental. Remember, we talked about it the last time. So I think that prevents people from actually seeking help. It doesn't have to be something more severe, mental health disorder, but we've been talking about even just regular talking sessions. These days, just having, kind of a therapy session just to go and just discuss some issue and, something that's been bothering, that's still a therapy session, but that's still a taboo, just normal therapy sessions like these.
True.
Anyway, apart from the cultural taboo surrounding mental health, specifically in the US, there's another big factor, right, that hinders our community, and that is always the cost
that is so
of these
true.
sessions.
So true. Yeah. And I think, one of the interesting statistics that I came across was that 34.1% of South Asian Americans seek clinical treatment in comparison to 41% of the general population.
Yeah.
So, you can see the disparities that the numbers that we see always don't tell the full story.
I mean, I still feel that divide is much larger, although the statistics say it's 34.1% to 41%.
Definitely, yes. No, and I think this was more around in the US because a recent poll by an organization called Brown Girl Therapy found that nearly half of the 23,000 something participants expressed that cost was their primary barrier, in seeking therapy.
Yeah, even like during my early years when I was trying to, understand, more as the self-awareness was growing, and I was trying to understand why, I'm reacting to things and not responding to some things, and why, kind of start questioning life. I did start seeking therapy, but one of the barriers for me was cost as well.
Definitely.
And convenience, right? Trying to get up and go to a therapist office among the chaotic work life, we have. And the second is, trying to find that good therapist, which we really build a relationship But every week we would like to go and see him or her.
Because that is the commitment,
It's
that
a
is
commitment.
required.
Yeah, but it's expensive. It's really expensive. Depending on how experienced your therapist is, it can go anywhere from, starting at $100 all the way to, I think, $350, $400, $500. I'm sure people are paying even more.
Yes.
Depending on who they're seeking therapy. And I have a little story about that later. I will talk about it.
No, definitely. With cost, I mean, I just started therapy this year for the first time ever, January of this year. And I had been looking for like 6 months. It's literally a process of like jumping through all kinds of hoops, because it's either you like the person and the cost is too much, or the cost is okay and you somehow, the therapist is not of a match. Because I also feel like with us South Asians, like, South Asians in general, and specifically for me, I needed a South Asian and I needed this person to be a woman, because that's what I was most comfortable with, and I remember finding a couple of them, and their cost was $250 and it was not covered under any insurance. There was no option. And I was like, if I'm going to come to you 4 times a month, I don't think that's sustainable. Let's be real. So I think, that aspect, cost, is such a big issue in the United States, especially. But actually, I was very, happy that I found an organization finally that I was able to work with. And I'm sure there are several of them. It's called KIP, if anyone's looking, because they have a sliding scale. So they have a sliding scale and they have people of, different levels of expertise. And you get to actually read their entire profile, get to know all the work that they have done, the kind of communities they've worked with, ethnicities they've worked with, their own background, and the areas that they specialize in. And this gave me, a great starting point, because actually I could sift through like, okay, I need a South Asian and this is what I want to deal with. This is what I want to talk about. And here are the experts. And, and I was able to work with them, and they actually accepted my insurance. So all of those factors kind of just like fell in place. The puzzle kind of came together. And that is very difficult for that to happen. I mean, it took me almost 7 months to reach that stage.
No, I can totally understand, because I think my journey has been pretty similar as well, because I think one of the factors that caused me to drop out of, consistent sessions is the cost. It was, first of all, just hard to find a good therapist within the area you were living. It probably was like a few miles away. So commuting back and forth. And at the time, this is like, I'm talking a few years ago, we still didn't have the Zoom sessions.
Exactly. This is pre-COVID you're talking about.
This is pre-COVID.
Oh my gosh,
so time factor was a big thing. And the second was the cost. $350 every session, every month. It didn't seem appetizing.
Yeah.
And I think post-COVID has changed a lot, because once there are these remote sessions and tele sessions, I think the scope of therapists and the access to therapy sessions have really expanded, and thereby also cutting the cost factor quite a bit. And like you mentioned, there are a few organizations that we can probably put it in our show notes that accept insurance, and maybe there is some little copay that you may have to pay. But the question comes as to, isn't this whole fundamental access to mental health just, the lack of access to mental health, even for people who can afford it? When you talk about $350, $250, it's still affordable for some folks, but it's not affordable for a lot of folks, right?
For the majority of them.
The majority of them. I mean, isn't there something fundamentally wrong? I mean, irrespective of whether this is South Asian or American,
100%.
It doesn't really matter. But access to mental health, especially in this age of, social media, in this digital age where
this post-COVID age,
Post-COVID age.
Yeah.
Where people are just love to text versus picking up the phone or meeting in person and talking. And where just being vulnerable is seen as some kind of, not a cool thing. So, and so many kids are now, we're seeing mental health affect children, teens. There's a lot of peer pressure into doing certain things. So isn't that a fundamental problem, that we do not have access to mental health, which is almost, in my opinion, so basic, like a primary healthcare checkup. You check your body, you're wondering whether, you're taking care of your health with a PCP. But what about the mental health? There should be a PCP for that as well, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense that the access is still limited, even though it's getting better, that nobody's really thinking about making this a priority.
No, that is so, so true. Because I feel like, especially like, having lived in America for like, almost 2 decades, you've lived here. I've lived here, over a decade. And I think the country is still coming to grips with even just giving every single individual basic access to physical health care,
Yeah.
just not even the mental health aspect, physical health care, and just having access to that. So we have like ways to go. But like you said, the lack of access is a real, real problem in terms of the insurance part of it.
Yeah.
But in terms of having access to South Asian therapists that cater to our diaspora audience, there are a lot of organizations that have come up with creating repositories of professionals. One of them being South Asian therapists. They're a counseling directory network. So if you go onto their website, you can find a whole list of therapists and counselors and all of their credentials, and you can, get in touch with them. Another one is Brown Girl Therapy, which we just mentioned, a fairly new mental health and wellness community who also cater to the South Asian community. Another one is South Asian Mental Health Initiative and Network, and they're building an entire infrastructure for mental health care for the South Asian diaspora.
Nice.
Now, in continuing this conversation, one of the things is that in our current scenario, as we're grappling with, a huge, unprecedented humanitarian crisis that has been right now in real time, as we speak, happening in Palestine. The organization that I just mentioned, Brown Girl Therapy, is actually hosting 3 free peer support sessions, which is all online, accessible to everyone on November 16th and on November 30th. People like us, you and me, who've been talking about this and, who've been sharing our own mental health struggles through these past 3-4 weeks and like, oh, when do we create content? What do we put out there? We're trying to be so conscious about all of this. So the aim of this is actually to bring people together, to talk, to share, to grieve, and to come together and be like, how each of us are feeling.
Right. To feel you're not alone.
Exactly, right? Because I don't think our generation has ever dealt with something like this. COVID was something that brought the whole world together. And I think after that, this humanitarian tragedy that is unfolding has everyone, kind of like reading up on history, seeing, who to support, like what they're reading up there. But all of this information is it feels like an avalanche. You're expected to like just get up to speed with all of that is happening. And that can be a lot mentally, and it can be very triggering, especially with so much loss of life, people are relating it to their own losses. And it can be really a very difficult time. So I think this is such a great initiative. For all our listeners, please check out Brown Girl Therapy. They're on Instagram. And all you need to do is just register on their website. The link will be sent to you. And there are 2 more sessions, November 16th and November 30th. So yeah, I feel like everyone should take advantage of it.
Yeah. And, just kind of stepping back, it's just the beginning here. And I'm so happy that there's a lot of this almost like a wake-up call for the South Asian community to really look into the aspects of mental health and make it more, accessible, normalize it. And we're just one little, group of people just having a conversation, but this conversation should just spread. And we need to hear more and more people talking about it, talking in families, talking in communities, and raising this awareness. Because, if you can change the mindset of one person for the better, for the positive, that just has such a great ripple effect. And it just affects more and more people that he or she comes across. And that's just such an amazing thing. It just improves our community, and which is what we need at this time. So some things that have on those same lines, I feel there are some amazing books that I've been able to read. And that's what kind of catapulted my whole mental health journey as well, trying to identify some of the things that happened in my life and seeing my pattern and how I react to situations and trying to recognize where that stems from. So I kind of went into this journey myself before really getting more serious about therapy as such. And one of the books that really helped me, and that was a more recent discovery, was by Stephanie Fu. And I think I must have mentioned it to you
Yes.
during one of our regular chats.
Mm-hmm.
It's called What My Bones Know. And Stephanie Fu is, she is a New Yorker reporter, I think, journalist. She's a journalist by profession. And she grew up in the Bay Area. And, she grew up in a Malaysian Chinese upbringing. And she talks a lot about her childhood trauma growing up, some really serious childhood trauma there, and how she kind of coped up with it. And then how she realized actually something was off, and how she sought therapy and how it changed her world. That got me to really thinking more that therapy is something that would affect the life in a positive way. Until then, it was a few sessions here, a few sessions there, but that kind of sealed the deal for me a little bit more.
That's amazing.
So I highly recommend everyone to take a look at it, especially if you are dealing with something that's far more severe childhood trauma, because her story is pretty graphic when you read her book. The other book is by Pete Walker. And one of the terms that I got to identify probably with myself, this is self-diagnosis again, is complex PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We all must have heard about PTSD, like, in a military or an army, if a comrade sees their troops just being killed, and, that's a shock right there. That's a trauma, which takes years for people to recover. So that's your PTSD. That's acute PTSD, seeing a particular event, getting devastated by it, and having a mental breakdown from it. But complex PTSD is like, imagine that in like microdoses over a period of years due to many different incidents that happened. So that's complex PTSD, which I did not know about until I read Stephanie Fu's book. So once I read her book, I just went into diving into understanding more about complex PTSD, which is what I think most people in the mental health space probably are dealing with in some way or the other. Because imagine it's like we're growing up in a household that looks fairly normal, but there are these little acts that happen that just affects us mentally in microdoses, right? Doesn't have to be truly violent, truly graphic, but in microdoses of something that just affects our psyche. And that's what complex PTSD is all about. And that changes the way you think, the mindset, the outlook in not so positive ways. So that's where I started going into that particular concept, saying, hey, maybe do I have complex PTSD? Let's see. And one of the books that I came across to really understand this was Pete Walker's Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And a third book that I highly recommend the audience is Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing by James Gordon. And James Gordon is a world-renowned leader in mental health. And he's done tremendous work in this field. And it's a book that I found completely enjoyable. So those are some books that helped me. At least helped me to get into therapy sessions more regularly. And I found great benefit from that. And I think this will definitely help a lot of people. And therapy is not because, you don't have to have a huge meltdown, or you don't have to have a
any life-changing event or anything.
Therapy could be a difficult relationship with a coworker. Therapy could be regarding a difficult time with spouse, with parenting, with child, where I think many times we're just automatically patterned to react. And we're not stopped, become self-aware and respond to a situation. And then a series of that pattern just changes life course. And then we're always repeating what we know and then wondering why things haven't changed around us.
That is so true.
So sometimes therapy just helps get that perspective and make that change. And so I guess that's why we are still talking about it.
No, that's really amazing. And I think what I really want to highlight quickly here is the fact that everyone's journey to actually seeking help, I think we mentioned this in our episode 1 as well, is so different, because you went the route of like saying that, oh, maybe something is wrong. And then, you found these books and, you were like, okay, so now I'm identifying this is what it is. These are my patterns. And now how do I break it? And then you sought therapy. For me, it was my journey with mindfulness and, just trying to like see, okay, these are my triggers. These are my patterns, but I don't know how to break out of it, but I need to talk to someone,
Right.
And that was my journey. So I feel like everyone's journey is so unique. And even like we always say, if our conversations, our chivazations can even impact and help one person, I think our job is done.
Yeah.
So yeah, on that note, that's it for us at this episode. And you do not want to miss our upcoming episode 3, where we'll be interviewing a mental health professional, an expert in her field, who comes with a wealth of cross-cultural counseling experience, both abroad and in India. And we're going to get a very, very fresh perspective from her, and we cannot wait.
Yes.
We don't want to reveal too much just yet, but we cannot wait.
We cannot wait. It's going to be an amazing episode. Awesome.
Yes.
Until then, goodbye from us, folks. Take care and take care of your mental health.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as we did. Please let us know what you think. It means the world to us.
Yes, and join the conversation on our social media channels, where we discuss the many facets of mental health and well-being and share our collective thoughts. If there's a topic you'd like us to talk about, write to us at chaibreakpodcast@gmail.com or DM us on our Instagram account.